Welcome back to another lecture with Mr. King, AP Euro folks. I know you're excited. This is truly an exciting time period, I think, and it's one that hopefully will be one of those more uplifting topics that we're going to encounter. And you see there a nice candle flame that suggests the idea of light, which gives its name to the entire period. So we're talking about the 18th century, really, following the work of the natural philosophers in the 17th century. The work of Pierre Bayle, that figure that kind of crosses over 17th and then 18th century, and you might remember his lectures, a fairly fascinating individual. So we have a couple of expressions that one associates with the Enlightenment. One is écraser l'infâme by Voltaire, and this really means crush the infamous thing. And what Voltaire was really referring to here, the thing that needed to be crushed was religious tradition, the Catholic Church's religious traditions and teachings that had accumulated over centuries and had prevented people, according to Voltaire and his fellow enlightened thinkers, from seeing the light. That is, people's eyes were darkened, or people lived in a state of darkness and ignorance on account of religious tradition. The other one, by a German enlightened figure, Kant, Immanuel Kant, is sapere aude. And so that's in Latin, and it means dare to know. And so the motto of the Enlightenment is crush the infamous thing, Voltaire in French, and then sapere aude in the... Okay, so after having looked at these two mottos of the Enlightenment, one in French, one in Latin, one Frenchman, one German, we're going to get into this thing called the Enlightenment. So the beginning. I think it's useful to think about this, where we've come from up to this point. And so this is also a good time to review for the midterm. Psalm 42 reads something to the effect that, "Here I am, Lord, I've come to serve you." End quote. And really that's the idea of tradition. The whole of Europe was at one point under the Catholic Church, the Universal Catholic Church, that duvet cover that I mentioned before, that metaphor. Now that's obviously changed as a result of the Protestant Reformation. However, I think this is the idea in Europe up to the natural revolution of the 17th century, the scientific revolution, that is, and the Enlightenment is going to continue building off of that. And what we see is, hey, tradition, I'm here to serve the Lord, and I look for guidance and direction from the Lord and or the Lord's book, the Bible. I look for how to behave in a virtuous way from the Bible. I obey the commandments of the Bible and or the church and its ministers, the clergy that occupy a special position in society and in these social orders. So that is all going to give way. And I think Alexander Pope, an English poet who writes this rhyming couplet that goes like this: "Know then thyself, presume not God to scan," sorry for the typing there, "the proper study of mankind is man." And so I think there's a clear shift in emphasis that the Enlightenment is going to really open up and kind of accelerate, if you will, in Europe. So with that being said, the Enlightenment in the 18th century was an intellectual movement that really helped to transform European society from its medieval, early modern, and traditional roots to a more modern society, one that we recognize today. And in fact, many aspects of life will undergo rational analysis and change in the Enlightenment, from the idea of social orders, the idea of economics, the idea of politics and how best to govern a society, the idea of art and what constitutes beauty will also be included in that. And so we're going to see a major and important, significant transformation of European society that comes into being. And so what we're going to be able to do is kind of summarize where we were, the medieval all the way up to the 17th, 18th century, and then we're going to see this turning of the page. And that turning of the page is going to lead to a new character in our story. Hey, a new Adam. Okay, Superman, superhero, the new Adam, or what we will call later the new man. And this idea of a new man or a new Adam comes about in the Enlightenment as we see a shift away from religion and tradition that I've already mentioned. So if you think about Adam being the first man created by God, the book of Genesis, the second man that redeems Adam, if you're a Christian, that is, Jesus Christ. And then we have, in the 18th century, Superman, This may seem irreverent to some, but Pierre Bell, if you remember those lectures on Pierre Bell, would say that's exactly what we need to apply here. We need to be irreverent. We need to sever the connection between human beings, their faith, human beings, and virtue and morality. That has to be severed and replaced with something else. And that's what this figure here, the superhero figure of Superman, is. So very much the Enlightenment is going to lead to a new Adam. And that's sort of a pattern we see throughout Western society. Why do we look for new men? We look for new men to lead us, to guide us, to inspire us, to instill hope in us, to give us purpose. And I think this is all very important. And again, lead, inspire, give hope, and give us purpose in life. And so that's going to be an interesting paradox in and of itself that we'll come to a little bit later. But I want to move on. So what we're going to look at is the philosophes. Philosophes is a French word for philosopher, though I would point out that the philosophes of the Enlightenment weren't truly philosophers in that they're not developing new systems or modes of thought. They're simply taking pre-existing systems of thought, going back to classical times and Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, if you will, using the ideas of questions. Think of Socrates, the great questioner. And so philosophes are really kind of propagandists of old philosophic techniques, but they're using these practices and techniques of questions, and they're applying them to their own contemporary society. So in a sense, the philosophes do something rather important. They sort of break with the past, and I already mentioned that we're going to move beyond this idea of tradition. That is the Christian medieval tradition that kind of held Europe together, helped people make sense of daily life, and created a certain harmony. Well, that's going to be broken, and it's going to be replaced with the writings and the ideas of these philosophes. And what we're going to see is that these philosophes operate very much within a print culture that provided ideas, facts, interpretations, and analyses of important events that were more contemporary in nature. And in some ways, these events were discussed and taken up in the coffee houses. So you see a picture of a coffee house down there below. By the way, the two pictures up above are two of the more famous philosophes. One on the left is Rousseau, the other on the right is Voltaire. And then you see the coffee house in the lower right, a gent and a chap drinking coffee while reading a daily newspaper. So we see the appearance of daily newspapers, something we already mentioned in a previous lecture, that's going to be a way for knowledge to be spread. And by the way, a paper, a periodical, is something that multiple people can read, and people would go to a coffee house, that is a public place, and get a hold of this paper. So you wouldn't have to buy the paper, you would purchase a cup of coffee and you could read the paper. After reading the paper, you could then share ideas and have discussions with other people that were at the coffee house. So that's a very public act that comes into being, and the philosophes very much provide the information, that is the facts, in a time when there were facts, as we think about today, the idea of fake news and the fog we seem to live in. This was a time when printed material was considered to be reliable and factually credible as a source of information. The other place that we see discussions going on are in the private salon, and you see a picture of a salon there. I know it's rather small and condensed, but the salon were these big, elaborate living rooms in the homes in the big cities, for example, Paris, London, and often salons were run by women. Madame Defont and Madame Jorin are going to be two of the leading women who play hostess, yet they're also there to hear, observe, and even contribute ideas and or ask questions. So we see now an expanded role for women. What a nice change that is, I'm sure. So within this public and also private, we see the beginnings of ideas that are going to come to form what we call public opinion on important issues. And this is going to continue to grow. Public opinion became quite important. In fact, Louis XV, an absolutist king in France, actually tried to suppress and abolish the regional courts of France. They were called parlements. He does so by royal decree, and these local regional courts, rather, disappear. Public opinion, however, rose up in outrage against this action by the king, and the king relented some years later, 5 or 6 years later, I believe it was. But none the fact, the king relents and restores these local courts to their functioning. So I think, as you can begin to see, or hopefully you can begin to see, that the spread of ideas and the discussion and the deliberation that is going to then come out of coffee house culture, come out of the salon, is going to actually influence the actions and policies of governments. And it's one of the goals of the philosophy and the Enlightenment in general, is to think about how best to govern a nation, how best to create a government and have it function to provide for the needs of the people. And so that's a very exciting element. And with that, I think I'll stop here at about 11 minutes, allow you guys to catch up with the notes and or write down any questions.